All right, ISHR students, we are here with the final lecture series in microeconomics. We'll be looking at market failure today. So let's go ahead and get right into our learning goals. Now please note that the learning goals I'm about to show you are the goals for the next 3 videos. We're going to be learning about market failures and something called externalities. We'll also be looking at demerit, merit goods, and public goods. Now, this specific video lecture will focus mostly on market failure, externalities, and demerit goods, and more specifically, negative externalities. So you get a few terms on this one. The following video will be positive externalities and then public goods. There are going to be a few diagrams that you need to create. So when we come to diagrams, please draw them and also write a few notes down about the type of externalities examples of externalities and how they are externalities, and we'll get into all that detail in just a second. All right, let's get right into it. So before we understand what a market failure is, we need to look at how the market actually is supposed to function. In theory, when we're at equilibrium, or when the supply equals the demand or the QS equals the QD, we say that this is an optimal situation. We call it allocative efficiency. The resources are being used by society in the most optimal way. Another way to think about it too is that the benefits to the consumers and the producers in terms of the consumer surplus and producer surplus are equal and maximized. So if we were to raise or lower the price, we would if let's say we would lower the price, the consumer surplus would get larger at the expense of the producer surplus. So if we're at equilibrium though, both groups are maximized equally, and that's a really good thing. Okay, so while we generally do say markets are great at deciding what to produce and how much to produce, there's no shortage, there's no surplus. The thing is, it doesn't always consider societal costs, and that's kind of what we'll be looking at today in just a moment. Okay, so one other thing about allocative efficiency and what we're going to learn in just a minute. We're going to add some new terms to your vocabulary and some new identifications for the lines supply and demand. Note that the demand curve is kind of equivalent to a marginal private benefit curve. What that really means, marginal private benefit, is the benefits that the individual consumer or consumer group receives from engaging in the market. That's the way that I like to think of it. So demand is synonymous with the individual benefits to the person consuming or the people consuming. MSB is the marginal societal benefit. So this is basically, it's almost like society's demand curve is maybe the easiest way to think about it. And so this is, again, demand and marginal private benefit will always equal each other. And this is the benefits to society. Hopefully they are all the same, that it's benefiting society as much as it's benefiting the individuals. Supply, on the other hand, is equal to marginal private cost. So this is basically looking at kind of like the private costs for producing a good. So supply is equal to MPC, and we hope that it's also equal to marginal social costs. We hope that everything that is produced, that the benefits to society are the same as the costs to society, that society is in equilibrium. And so when we have demand equals supply, in all the examples that we've thought about thus far, we've been kind of thinking like, hopefully the benefits and the cost to society are the same as the benefits and the cost to the individual. But that doesn't always happen. And we have what's called a market failure. And I want you to write this down. It's the allocation of resources by a free market that is not socially optimal, where marginal social cost does not equal marginal social benefit. This is one acceptable definition of market failure. But please note that this doesn't always happen. Sometimes the cost to society don't equal the benefits, and the market fails to do what it's supposed to do. All right, let's move on. So, as we just said, we've got social efficiency when the benefits, or allocative efficiency would be another way to think of it. When the benefits to society equal the cost to society, this is generally a good thing. Allocative efficiency, I guess, is slightly different, but it's kind of a similar concept. Just note, as we said a moment ago, that if we ever have a situation where there are societal impacts, whether they're positive or negative, we have an externality. So let's go ahead and get right to externalities. What are they? Well, let's kind of get you to think about this in a more simplistic way so you understand. Have you ever consumed or produced something where it impacted a third party either in a positive or negative way? You probably don't realize this, but this happens all the time. If you've done that, if you've consumed something or produced something that's impacted others around you, you've created what's called an externality. Let's go ahead and write this down. It's basically an impact on a third party not involved in the production or consumption of a good. Some other economists also refer to it as spillover effects on third parties because, sometimes goods are consumed or produced and it ends up impacting society or people around the goods that are being consumed or produced. Let's give you some examples. So let's talk about a positive externality. This is where something is consumed or produced and it ends up benefiting those around them. So, for example, middle schoolers, a lot of you probably know this, but I also teach 8th grade. And a lot of the time when you 11th graders walk into the room, some of you complain and say, it's kind of stinky in here. And the reason for that is because, immediately before you walk in, I've got a big group of 8th graders, many of which have just come from PE. And not all of those 8th graders know about this little invention called deodorant. You can kind of see it's kind of illustrated by this movie that came out recently and all these smells coming out of this. I look at those as smells. Smells coming out of the backpack of the 8th grader. The thing is, if the 8th graders were to start consuming deodorant, if they would buy it and use it, we would all benefit. There would be a spillover impact onto others. And so does the individual 8th grader benefits from using deodorant in that maybe they feel cleaner and they smell better. But all of society benefits when, we all acknowledge that, oh wow, the room smells better and it's nicer to be in here now. I don't have to open the window in the middle of winter because it smells like a pair of old dirty socks. So this is a positive externality. When they consume deodorant, it benefits all of us. There are also negative externalities. These are things that basically, have negative spillover impacts. A good example would be like if Jürgen Drews, famous Schlager musician, if he were to come to Hanover HDI Arena, which is very close to our school, and to give a concert, the people that would go and buy those tickets to the concert, they would be consuming that good or that service, and Jürgen Drews would be producing. However, we would all have to listen to that. We would have to listen to Ein Bett in Kornfeld. And maybe it would disrupt our classes, it would disrupt what we're doing, it wouldn't be good. Another one would be Andre Rieu. If this guy came to Hanover, the Flying Dutchman, and played his music, we would all have to listen to it. Maybe if it was during classes or something, it would disrupt what we were doing. And, we didn't consume that good, but we were impacted negatively by it. Thanks, Andre. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about negative externalities. The examples I just gave you were kind of small-scale, cute examples. Often you don't want to use those in an IB test. You'll want to use more typical, concrete examples. Don't refer to Andre Rieu in an IB exam. Now, maybe a good example would be the production of electricity from coal-fired power plants. Coal creates a lot of, there's a lot of exhaust, a lot of Abgas, as you say in German, that comes out of the factories that are, Kraftwerk, the power plants that are producing this. So because this would be what's called a production externality, because when the good is produced, it creates a spillover impact onto society. And so just note that this is something that when the producers make it, they don't intend to impact society, but they do. And it would put us in a situation where we are not in an optimal allocation of resources, because there's a company that's making the power, and there are people that are purchasing that power. But there are other people that are maybe not purchasing that power or are impacted by the quality of air that's gone down. So we would say there's an externality in there that air quality is lower for everyone, including those that weren't producing or consuming the energy. So we can make a diagram for this. Let's go ahead and look at what it would look like. So as we just said, this is a negative production externality. Whenever you think of an externality, ask yourself, who's creating it, the consumer or the producer? If it's the producer, the externalities will always be shown with the supply curves, the two curves that are upward sloping. In this case, we're going to say that the private cost is lower than the cost to society. So you can kind of see here the prices here. The cost to the individual firm is lower than the cost to society. So here we've got another curve. Our demand equals marginal private benefit equals marginal social benefit, where demand equals the private benefit and is equal to the supply or marginal private cost. So where supply equals demand, or MPB equals MPC, this is where the market's at. This is the quantity the market is producing. The thing is, where marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost, here we see that this is what's called the socially optimal quantity, or Q optimal amount of energy produced, and so with coal-fired power plants. So when we look at this, we can see that an optimal amount of production is lower than what's currently being produced. This is a negative externality. It's hurting our air quality. It's causing things like lung cancer and different respiratory problems. So we want less of whatever this is. So please just note that what the market's producing and what would be optimal is lower. So if a negative externality, if it's ever negative, we want less. The vertical distance between the two supply curves is the extent of the externality. The triangle that I've just created here is what's called a welfare loss. And basically it's, both consumers and producers are losing out on some economic welfare here. All right, let's move on. Actually, before we do, please note that you want to be able to do this diagram. You also need to explain that there are spillover impacts, externalities on third parties, and that people that didn't produce or consume energy and were ended up negatively impacted by the externality of production.
Sorry.
All right, so moving on to demerit goods. Demerit goods are basically goods that negatively impact society. They have negative externalities. Good examples are things like cigarettes and alcohol. You can see a bunch of cigarettes there. We defined this. The definition for demerit goods should be, these are goods that are often over-provided, therefore over-consumed. Again, they are goods that are over-provided, therefore over-consumed, and they harm society. They're things like cigarettes and alcohol. Okay. You can probably think, pretty simply that these externalities are, you can think about how they impact society, right? Like they're produced by companies, but when they are consumed, when people smoke cigarettes, that's when the externality is created. Those standing around a smoker will be impacted by the secondhand smoke. Also, the healthcare costs that we all end up paying will be higher as people that have either illnesses themselves or illnesses from secondhand smoke, that will burden all of our healthcare costs. So we would say it's an externality, a negative externality of consumption. Let's go ahead and look at that diagram, what would it look like. Please note here that this is a negative externality consumption, so we're going to see the externality with the demand curves here, not the supply. Here we can see the private benefit, the net benefit to the individual consumer, is lower than the benefit to society. And so here's, where demand equals supply, this is what the market is currently producing, and here, where the societal benefit equals the societal cost, this will be the social optimum. So what we really want to note here is that the quantity that the market produces is higher than what would be optimal for society. We want less. The distance between the two curves is the basically extent of the externality. Again, we have a welfare loss that's pointing to the left. So just when you want to remember negative externalities, remember that the welfare loss is kind of like Beyonce's song. If it's a negative externality, whether it's whether it's negative externalities of production or negative externalities of consumption, it will always be to the left, to the left. All right, so please write down this diagram or copy this diagram down, and again note that the amount the market is producing is greater than what the optimal amount of production and consumption would be. All right, a little quick quiz. Hopefully you were paying attention. Go ahead and close your notes and see if you remember a few things. First, define the term demerit good. Next, can you draw a negative externality of production, so a couple slides ago, from memory, and explain what, give an example of that externality. Go ahead and give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.